Real quick, I'd like to give a massive shout out to all the homies on Patreon who chose to support the cult and help keep the lights on. If you want more information on how to support the channel and get your name up here at these fucking chads, check out the video description below. All right. Hey guys, I know it's been a while since I posted videos, and to be honest, it's because I've been absolutely no-lifing the Wrath beta. By no-lifing, I mean 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, spamming heroics every damn day. Feel free to come check out the stream, by the way, over at twitch.tv/CrixVibes, because you know we over there vibing. Anyway, at this point, I've done countless heroics, both on private servers and now on Blizzard's live server. And I think it's time for a proper dungeon guide. This guide will work for dungeon cleaving, normals, and heroics. Just use the timestamps to skip wherever you need to go to, alright? If for some reason the spec, class, or the dungeon change, then I'll make an updated guide. But first, before we begin, if you're watching this and you're looking for an amazing written guide, I highly suggest you check out Zephans' guides over at both Wowhead and WoW Tavern. He's recently remade the guides and they are absolutely phenomenal. A link to them will be posted in the description below. Also, please, while you're there, check out the Warlock Discord, your one-stop shop for everything Warlock related. Okay, now, onto the juicy part. Unlike TBC, each Warlock spec is very, very different. Not only in gameplay, but all different gearing, different rotations, different demons, and the list goes on. Most importantly, all 3 Warlock specializations are all doing crazy damage on the beta right now. Even Affliction in dungeons is pumping crazy. So since each spec has its own personality, if you will, it's only right to give each spec their own video. So I hope you enjoy this, and if you're seeing this before I post the other specs, then please let me know in the comments how I can make the future ones better. Let's start with the strengths and weaknesses of Demonology strictly in terms of dungeoning only, whether that's dungeon cleaving at launch, or you're watching this a few months later and you're just looking for a good dungeon spec for all your heroics. To start, Demonology has extraordinary AoE. I'm talking next level, insane burst AoE. So high that thus far I have had to use Soul Shatter or get a bop, which is now known as a hop, with it every time, or I'll rip aggro and die. At a glance, nothing changed too much in terms of how you AoE. You put a couple dots up if they'll last, then you spam Seed of Corruption while your pet cleaves his way to the top of the meters. But there's more to it, and I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. Metamorphosis. Which, while we're on the topic, let's just talk about it now. Meta turns you into a fucking huge demon for 30 seconds. While in this form, you gain 600% armor, all of your damage is increased by 20%, and it also reduces the chance you'll be critically hit by melee by 6% and reduces the duration of stun and snare effects on you by 50%. So you're pretty much just unstoppable freak of nature. Not only that, but you get 4 new abilities that can only be used while in meta. The first one is called Challenging Howl, which is an AoE taunt. This paired with your 600% armor buff can be used to save your group if your tank goes down or, you know, just shit goes south like it usually does, and it's really handy. Next is Shadow Cleave, which is exactly what it sounds like. You cleave targets in shadow. Yeah. This ability is queued in your next melee attack and should be macroed into some of your other abilities, which we'll go over later on in the video. Anyways, this does some nice cleave damage for free, so expect to use it. The third ability you get is Demon Charge, which is simply a fun charge. This allows you to, well, charge your enemy. While this can be very useful, it's not suggested to do so unless you're like super far out at max range, because at that point you might as well just run inside and wait to pop meta until you're in melee range, you know? Like, why pop it outside of meta and waste those precious moments? In any case, this can be very useful in terms of mobility, because there's times when I'm in meta and emo aura is out and I'm just pumping mad AoE threat, and then once I pulled aggro, I can demonic gateway out of harm's reach and then charge back into another mob if needed, right? To kind of get away, kind of like an escape route thing. There's many fun things you can do with this, but yeah, sadly, in an optimal situation, you won't be using it this much. Over to the last ability, which is by far the most important one. It's Immolation Aura. This is an AoE that deals an insane amount of fire damage to all enemies in melee range for 15 seconds. This is very overpowered. It's an aura, meaning you just use emo aura and you continue to seed, Shadowflame, put up dots, or whatever you want to do and watch the numbers go wild. This is easily the draw behind playing Demonology, and the reason, in my opinion, that it's the best Warlock spec to be spamming dungeons or dungeon cleaving in. Not only do you have amazing AoE, but you also have superb single target due to meta as well. Remember, it increases all your damage by 20%. Plus, Immolation Aura is also a single target damage increase. Mix that with the power of the rest of your Warlock spells and an insanely strong Felguard, and you'll be carrying your dungeon groups in no time. Another very nice thing about Demonology Warlocks is that you have a talent called Demonic Pact, which not only increases your damage by 10%, but also whenever your Felguard crits, it snapshots 10% of whatever your current spell power is at that exact moment, and it buffs your party, or raid if you're in a raid, with 10% of it for 45 seconds, with a 20-second cooldown. Meaning if your pet crits again, it won't change the spell power buffs until after that 20 seconds. However, once he crits after that 20 seconds, it will resnap the spell power, which is kind of lame. And it's one of the things us in the Warlock Discord are trying to get changed. So we'll see. But yeah, here's a petition I'll put in the description. There'll be a video about this later. I recorded this before they changed it. Blizzard changed it, thank God. The Warlock Discord put together a petition and it worked. So now the new changes are as followed from the lovely, the beautiful, the outstanding Warlock Discord. Anyway, the new change is Demonic Pact functions with a 45-second duration and a 5-second ICD that now matches the new tooltip, which I'll show you in a little bit. The following rules for application were found when testing. You can overwrite weaker demonic pacts with stronger ones, which is good. The problem was that you could overwrite that stronger with the weaker. Now you can't. You can no longer, right here, you cannot overwrite stronger buffs with the weaker buffs other than the last 10 seconds. You can overwrite the last 10 seconds of a stronger buff with the weaker one. And that is amazing that this changed. So I fucking love you, Blizzard, if you're watching. We all thank you. Continue. This buff is already at about 300 to 350 spell power, and I'm not even in Pre-BiS gear at level 80. It was even around 150-ish spell power when I was level 70. So yeah, this buff is pretty big for not only the casters in your party, but also the healers too, since healing is now based on spell power. Arguably the only downside to dungeoning is Demonology is pretty much only that you have some pet management. However, most of the other specs have pet management too. Granted, yours is melee, and does more threats, so maybe he will die a few more times, but not too much though, to be honest, as the demons get a buff to their avoidance, as well as our talent Fell Synergy, which heals our demon for 15% of all damage that you deal, and we're dealing a ton of damage. And if for some reason he still needs to be healed, you have a healer in your group. Plus, to top it off, you have Fell Domination, which was buffed severely in Wrath and is now a 3-minute cooldown, and you can even get it down to 2 minutes if you talent it, which you will be talenting it. And if your Felguard is dying more than once every 2 minutes, then you're fucking trolling. Yes, he will die to the occasional hard-hitting whirlwind or whatever it is, but you will always be able to get him back up instantly, and it rarely happens. Next, I'll show you the spec I'd suggest going strictly for doing dungeons. I'll touch on some differences depending on what content you're doing. Okay, so no matter if you're watching this at level 70, getting ready to start leveling at launch with your dungeon cleave team, or you're watching this at level 80 and you're getting ready for your first heroics, your Demonology tree should look something like this. This requires level 63, and in my opinion is the baseline for demo dungeoning. What you do with the remaining talent points will depend on what content you're doing, but before we get there, let's go over these. First off is Demonic Embrace, which simply gives you 10% stamina. Nothing crazy, but the first tier talents aren't really mind-blowing or anything, but we do like stamina. You'll be tanking some hits as it is in AoE and in melee range a lot, so we'll take it. Next 2 points are completely up to you. Either improved Hellstone or Fell Synergy, or you can put one in each, up to you really, I swear. I prefer to put them in Fell Synergy, which heals your pet for 15% of all damage that you deal. This alleviates any and all pressure from me watching for my pet. I literally forget about him and do not pay attention to him, and I almost never have issues. I literally just send him in and never think about him again. Some people prefer not to take this talent as you do have a healer in your group, and that is more than okay. If so, just put him in the Imp Hellstone. I just personally prefer Fell Synergy as nobody seems to use Hellstones that much, and this large amount of passive healing frees up extra mana from the healer, allowing the healer their DPS and makes the run go faster, or he can save the mana completely and be able to go longer without having to sit and drink. You can also meet in the middle and put 1 point in Hellstone and Fell Synergy, like I said, if you're really conflicted. The next tier, we're putting 3 points into Fell Vitality for more stamina and intellect for our Felguard and more health and mana for ourselves. Then we're going to slide over the Demonic Brutality, which will increase the power bonus on your Felguard's Demonic Frenzy by 3%. After that, drop down to Souling for some tankiness, and then Feldom so you can get your Felguard out ASAP when he dies. Lastly, in that tier, put 3 points in Demonic Aegis, as it will give you about 54 more spell power from your Fel Armor. Next tier, slap 5 points into Unholy Power to simply increase your Felguard's overall damage by 20%. The point next door in Master Summoner is a flex point. Feel free to put it wherever you want. I just use it for the faster summon for the rare occasions that I do need a new Felguard. Next tier, take Mana Feed, as this will ensure your Felguard pretty much never runs out of mana, which, by the way, he does go through pretty fast if you're chain pulling any dungeon content, which you will be chain pulling these content. It's very easy. So it's pretty nice. Then put 2 points into Master Conjurer. This will increase the stat ratings of your Spellstone or your Firestone by 300%. For the sake of this video, the Firestone gains an additional 147 crit rating, and Spellstone gains an additional 180 haste rating. Next here, put 5 points into Master Demonologist, as this will increase all of your damage and your Felguard's damage by 5%. The next 3 points in Molten Core are very important, as this is where a chunk of your damage comes from. Every time Corruption deals damage, you have a 12% chance to get 3 stacks of Molten Core. These stacks will empower your Incinerate and your Soulfire. It increases the damage of Incinerate by 18% and reduces its cast time by 30%. For Soulfire, it increases the damage by 18% and also the crit chance by 15%. Unless in an AoE situation, when you get Molten Core procs, you are to use all 3 stacks on Incinerate into a target that has Immolate on him. If you are in execute range, which is sub 35% health thanks to the talent Decimation, which we'll touch on in a second, you will be spamming Soulfires. Next here, get Demonic Empowerment and use it on cooldown. I personally bake it into a macro, into my Shadowbolt and my Seed of Corruptions, so it will always be used. This will increase your Felguard's attack speed by 20%. Then drop 3 points into Demonic Knowledge, as this will give you a nice boost in your spell power. To give you perspective, at level 80 with my Felguard, I gain about 175 spell power with this talent. Next here, put 5 points in Demonic Tactics to increase both you and your Felguard's crit chance by 10%. Then put the 2 points into my favorite talent in the game, Decimation. Now this, my guys, is the execute talent. Whenever you Shadowbolt, Incinerate, or Soulfire any target under 35%, you get Decimation, which reduces the cast time of your Soulfire by 40% for 10 seconds. And during this time, your Soulfire costs no soul shards to cast. Mix this with Molten Core procs, and it's easily the most fun I've ever had in my fucking life. I've even gone so far as to see how high I can get my crits while stacking everything up with meta and cooldowns, and I got 20k Soulfire off. Big 20k! What the fuck? It happens frequently, and it only gets better the more gear you get. A lot of the gameplay of a Demonology is just nuking packs down with AoE until they get low, and when they get low enough, sniping a Decimation proc off a low HP mob with a rank 1 Shadowbolt, and then turning back onto the main mob and slamming Soulfires into him. It's pretty cool. Next here, of course, take Felguard. Not going to talk about him much because he doesn't change outside of this. Dude hits so much harder than he does in TBC, and he's super easy to keep alive. So easy that I don't even need to pay attention to him. Like I mentioned earlier, this talent, Fel Synergy, plus you have a healer in your group, he will not die. After that, put 3 points in Nemesis, which reduces the cooldown of Demonic Empowerment, Fel Dom, and most importantly, Metamorphosis by 30%. Taking the meta cooldown to 2.1 minutes instead of 3 minutes is a big deal in dungeons. I know in raids we don't take all 3 points, however this is strictly for dungeons where you want your meta as much as I can get it. And lastly, to finish up the demo tree, put 5 points in Demonic Pack and then grab Metamorphosis. Demonic Pack is a group buff we spoke about earlier. I'd not worry about min-maxing for this buff since you're just spamming dungeons, but feel free to do so if you want. I'll have a weak aura link in the description to help you keep track of it. Now that the demo tree is done, we have options on where to go next. You can go down Affliction to get some stronger seeds with some threat reduction on them, or you can go down Destro for some significant single target increase. No matter which you choose, please note that you should use the talent suppression based on if you need hit. In dungeons, I typically don't care about hit and would rather stick with haste, crit, and whatever else. But if you're boosted gear or templated and super low on hit, then 1 to 2 points in suppression is fantastic. If you're watching this and you're prepping for launch and dungeon cleaving, I'd suggest putting 5 points into the new, reworked, and amazing improved corruption talent, which now increases your corruption damage by 10%, but more importantly, gives you 5% crit on your Seed of Corruption. After that, I would put 2 points into improved Drain Soul for the threat reduction on all your affliction spells. Remember that Seed of Corruption is considered an affliction spell, so not only will you benefit from the hit on suppression if needed, but you'll also have this threat reduction. Once you start leveling up and getting more talent points, you can put 2 in improved life tap if you feel like you could use more mana. If not, then completely ignore that talent and swing down to Destruction for improved Shadowbolt and Bane. These will quicken and buffen your Shadowbolts to help you out some on single target. Now, if you're watching this at level 80 and doing some heroics, and you can for sure run that same spec, or what I would suggest is you disregard all of the affliction talents and just go straight to ISB, then Bane, then Ruin. This will give you some nutty single target as well as burst damage. It will also leave you with 2 points to put wherever you want. Improved corruption for the seed damage, improved hellstone, or wherever, literally wherever you want to put them. Next, we'll touch on glyphs. While the glyphs are pretty straightforward on what to take, we do have different ones we can use depending on when you're watching this video. If you're watching this before launch, then literally every single good glyph that Warlocks can use will not be available for dungeon cleaving, as all the good ones require Northrend materials. Of course, during the early days of launch, keep an eye out on the auction house for those power gamers that sped leveled their inscription for the better glyphs that will be listed in the next section after the pre-patch and launch glyphs. If you're watching this at any time a week or so after launch, then disregard this entire first section and click the next timestamp because all the good ones should be available by now. I'm not going to go over every single glyph, just the good ones. If you're watching this and wondering what glyphs are available at launch, then in the description is a link to a Google Doc that has each class's glyphs and whether they'll be at launch or not. Just look for these check marks. First off, the pre-patch and launch glyphs. We don't have many options and they're all fucking horrible, but it's all we got. Not only that, but you only have 2 major glyph slots until level 80 when you get your third. So for the first one, I'd suggest going with Glyph of Hellstone, which increases the amount received by your Hellstone by an additional 30%. Nothing much to take here, but the extra health on the occasional Hellstone is better than nothing. For your second slot, I'd suggest going with Glyph of Corruption, which pretty much just gives you Nightfall without having to take the talent Nightfall. And it also stacks with Nightfall if you're Affliction and had the talent. This glyph, even as Demonology, really isn't that bad, considering Corruption is baseline instant cast now, and you can use it more frequently while moving or while the tank is gathering mobs, and of course for your molten core procs. So nothing wrong with some instant cast Shadow Bolts on the side. Speaking of Shadow Bolt, remember how I said we're limited on glyphs at launch? Well, honorable mention to the next best option, Glyph of Shadow Bolt, which reduces the mana cost of your Shadow Bolt by 10%. Told you we didn't have a lot of options. Okay, glyphs, okay. Fast forward to whenever you're watching this video after the launch hype and the glyphs are all made, which to be fair, shouldn't be more than a week after launch, okay? For these glyphs, you have so much more viable options. However, I'm only going to list 3 because that's the 3 you should be using, plus an honorable mention for those running the hybrid build I mentioned earlier. The first one is the Glyph of Felguard. This increases your Felguard's attack power by 20%. Your Felguard is significantly stronger than he was in TBC, and with this glyph added to it, whoo, he starts to pump, boys. Next up is Glyph of Metamorphosis, which simply extends your meta by 6 seconds, which is amazing because not only does it give you an extra 6 seconds on your meta buff, but this allows you to have your Immolation Aura twice. If you use Emo Aura right as you meta, then it will actually come off cooldown and you'll be able to cast it again for the 6 seconds, giving you an insane AoE for just a little bit longer. Next up is the bread and butter one, Glyph of Life Tap. When you Life Tap, or Dark Pact, you gain 20% of your spirit as spell power for 40 seconds. This is a massive spell power buff that you should be tracking and have up 100% of the time. I'll have a weak one in the description if you need one. Early on, with virtually no spirit, I'm still getting roughly 70 spell power, and that's only because I'm still in Sunwell gear, and Sunwell gear literally has fucking 0 spirit on it. As you hit level 80 and start gearing, you'll gain a lot of spirit, making this glyph even stronger. Next up, we'll touch on the minor glyphs, which are extremely boring. The only one that matters is Glyph of Drain Soul, which allows you the chance to gain an additional soul shard while drain souling. The last 2 minor glyphs do not matter at all, but I plan to use Glyph of Underwater Breathing, which increases the swim speed of anybody with your underwater breathing buff. Pretty handy for those swimming quests, I guess. And lastly, Glyph of Souls, which reduces the mana cost of your soul well by 70%. Yeah, like I said, minor glyphs are pretty boring. Okay, next I want to talk about consumes that you can use in dungeons. Of course, the dungeons are very easy. So I'm not saying consumes are needed because let's be real, they aren't needed. We are literally clearing heroics with ease at level 76 and 77. The only problem is that some of these bosses are 82 and we're not able to hit them. Other than that, they're easy. However, I still use consumes because I'm sweaty and I'm not the only one who does this. So here's a segment for you guys. For Flask, we have Flask of Pure Death, which was the TBC one. And now the new one is the Flask of the Frostworm, which of course you will not be able to get right away at launch. So if you're watching this to prep for Lich King, well, you're stuck with Flask of Pure Death. If you're watching this later, well, you know, hey, Frostworm it up. As for the weapon oils, well, they don't exist anymore. Actually, technically they do exist, but you won't be using them. Instead, Firestones and Spellstones are reworked and buffed significantly in Wrath of the Lich King. Instead of being in a wand slot, they are now your weapon oil. Firestone increases damage dealt by your direct damaging spells by 1% and increases your critical strike rating, while Spellstone increases your dot damage by 1% and gives you haste rating. How much crit and haste you get on these combat ratings depend on if you have the Master Conjurer talent, which since we're Demonology, we do. But for the sake of anybody wondering, I'll save you the time. Here's the difference between the Firestone and the Spellstone with and without the Master Conjurer talent. The Firestone gains an additional 147 crit rating and the Spellstone gains an additional 180 haste. As for the potions, they were changed in Wrath. Not only are there new potions, but the way they work are changed. They're now a 60-second cooldown. However, you can only use 1 per combat, and you have to drop combat to start that 60-second cooldown. It's worth noting that you can pre-pop a potion if you choose to do so by popping a potion before combat starts. However, not too many fights in dungeons will last more than 60 seconds. But if you're like me and want to pop potions in dungeons, I would suggest using the good old trusty, dusty, rusty, make crusty destruction potions. Obviously not as good as the new Wrath potions, but the potions of speed and potions of wild magic will be super expensive and in my opinion not worth popping in dungeons pretty much ever. However, destruction potions will shoot down in price a couple days after launch. As for when I use them, I pretty much only use them with my other CDs. I bake it into a macro with whatever trinket I'm using, Blood Fury if I'm on my Orc, and of course the beautiful and lovely Flame Caps. Yes, you'll still be using Flame Caps the entire expansion and they are OP. You can expect to be using them literally on cooldown as Destro or during your execute as Demonology. On dungeons, I use a Mon Pull and the macro to buff Immolation Aura and any Molten Core procs later down at the end of the buff. As for mana potions, I do not use these much in dungeons. I do plan to bring some TBC mana injectives because they're cheap, just for those big omega huge pools. And I want to keep spamming seeds instead of tapping during it, you know. But other than that, I feel like Destro Pots are the ideal pick, even at 80 with some of the new potions available. As for food, you have your TVC food or Wrath food. I would just pick whatever one is current for you watching this video. If you're watching this pre-launch, then munch on the Blackened Basilisk and the Poached Bluefish. If you're watching this during Wrath, then munch on the Firecracker Salmon or the good old Fish Feast. Don't worry about the hit food. Of course, since this is a pet spec, you already know I was going to mention the pet food. Pet food is usually pretty cheap and it gives them a nice boost to the Felguard's damage. You can use the TBC pet food, Kibler's Bits, or the Wrath version, Spiced Mammoth Treats, which is only 10 more strength and stamina than Kibler's Bits. So if they for some reason are expensive, just hit those Kibblers up. Lastly, for you and your pet are scrolls. I'm not going to sit and list them all, but slap some strength and agi scrolls on a pet, a spirit or an int scroll on yourself if you're missing those buffs, and get to pumping. As for gearing in dungeons, this is a pretty broad topic that I don't think belongs in this video, since it's not really a gearing video. Kind of just doing dungeons with whatever gear you have. Obviously, make sure you're gemmed and enchanted properly, which if you're looking for more information on the topic, please make sure you hit that red subscribe button and follow the channel, because I'm doing a huge gearing guide up here real soon per spec, going over everything gear and stat related. In the meantime, know that dungeons are still heavy AoE, meaning haste is still lovely, as the faster you seed, the more damage you do. And I intend to put on some heavy haste pieces and some trinkets on for my spamming. Lastly, I'll toss out a couple key and vital tips, macros, and weak auras. The first one is to not forget about your Infernal. It was changed and now only a 10-minute cooldown, and he does an absolute fuck ton of damage. The next one, rank 1 Shadowbolt is your best friend. You can easily and should be looking to snipe any decimations from lower health mobs, as long as you're not in AoE situations, so you can turn around and spam Soulfire on the main target or anything left standing. Bonus tip, use a mouseover macro so you don't have to target the low mob. Looks like this, but it will also be in the description of the video. Demonology is the only spec that has slight shard issues. The only time you really do is with Soulfires. You don't ever really Soulfire during combat unless it's during the Decimation execute window, which makes your Soulfire not cost a shard. However, in this example, let's say you have 1 second left on your Deci buff. We start casting Soulfire and we get the 40% haste on it because we're casting it while we have the buff, but then the buff fades away. And since the buff faded away before we ended up casting it, it actually costed a soul shard. This happens all the time when you're doing dungeon, and it just means you're trying to blast. So be prepared and get some soul shards. Soul shard got a pleasant buff on its cooldown. It's now only a 3-minute cooldown, which does not line up perfectly with meta if you have Nemesis, but you should be looking to always shatter with your meta if you can. Your AoE damage during meta is more threat than any other spec can put out, and you will pull aggro if you're not careful. My AoE rotation is as follows. For the AoE rotation, I like to put a gateway up right away, of course, as always, just in case you need to get out, especially in situations where you can run back in and charge and whatever else, you know what I mean? And then I'm going to, as I'm running in, sticking my pet in, I'm going to corruption a couple mobs as I get closer, a couple mobs, and once I'm in there, I'm going to meta, I'm going to Shadow Cleave, I'm going to Emo Aura, I'm going to Shadowflame, and I'm spamming seeds on everything around me. Just spamming seeds on everything around me. Every time Shadowflame comes off cooldown, make sure you use it again, all right? And then when you, pull aggro, yeet. I'm over here. That's it. Also note on the AoE packs, remember like I said earlier, your job is AoE until something gets lower, and pretend it's this guy. Something gets lower. Oh, he's sub 35%. I can snipe a molten core off him and start spamming Soulfires. All right, single target rotation on whatever mob or boss you're fighting or whatever. I always put up a gateway, even if I don't use it half the time. Pre-pop a potion if you want to. You don't need to. That's up to you. Use your own money. Always life tap, so you have your life tap clip up. Send your pet in. Shadowbolt to put ISB up on the target. Remember, this gives the crit. We send a Shadowbolt. It puts up that crit right away. Chance to be critically hit by 5%. You want that up immediately. That's for you and everybody else. So pretend this is the first one. There's the first one. Then I'm immolating. Then I'm corrupting. Corrupting resisted. Then I'm corrupting. Then I'm agonying. Then I'm popping my cooldowns. Then I'm spamming Shadowbolts. And I'm waiting patiently for this molten core to light up. When it lights up, I spam 3 incinerates, like I said earlier. There it is. It lights up. Cancel. I don't have a stop cancel macro set, but whatever. 3 of those. Then you're back at your Shadowbolts. Okay. Now we're gonna do this again with meta. Call my pet back. We're gonna wait a couple seconds for meta to come up. And with meta, the important thing to notice is that immolation aura is a DPS increase, right? So you do want to be emo auring. So in this situation, if we pretend that we have meta, we have a gateway up over here. Put a gateway up. Okay, boss fight starting. Couple seconds. Okay, I'm tapping once. I'm pre-potting. I'm sitting my pet in with my putting up ISB right away. I'm immolating, and after the immolate sticks, I'm gonna run in. As I'm running in, I'm corrupting. I'm agonying. I'm in meta. Agony resisted. I'm in meta. I'm emo auring. And you're going through your rotation. Pop your cooldowns, spam Shadowbolts, right? Or incinerates. You do the exact same thing. Look, molten cores. You do the exact same thing you just did, except for you do it, you know, in meta form. You just keep going. Oh yeah, another molten core proc. Nice. We just sit there and keep spamming. Okay, corruption's off. Keep your dots up. By now, you're in a dungeon. By now, the bosses are dead. You know what I mean? But you get it. Oh, we pulled aggro. We're back here. We're hanging out. Oh my god, we got to go over here to this other mob. You get it. You know what I mean? That's it, boys. Yo, I want to show you quickly execute range. There's no training dummy, so I had to go to this guy. There's nothing really different besides you're spamming Soulfire, right? You're going to pretty much stop doing all your dots. Make sure you put up a corruption beforehand because the boss dies so fast in a dungeon. And you put up, whatever you're in the middle of doing that procs, your Shadowbolt, your rank 1, your incinerate, whatever, and you just spam Soulfires. Use your cooldowns, use your thing. You literally are just 100% spamming Soulfires. Don't worry about putting your dots back up. If it's like, for some reason you're in a dungeon and you can put a corruption back up, I would put a corruption back up. But I mean, it's a dungeon boss. I doubt you're gonna have that much time. That's why I always put the corruption up before you even start soulfiring. You know what I mean? That's about it with it. Macros, most of which are not needed, but they just make my life easier. I have pretty much all my spells on a mouse over macro. This is not needed, like I just said, but very helpful, as I hate having to click a target a new mob. I'd rather just mouse over and cast whatever dot or spell I want on it. Here's what the macro looks like if you want to just copy it. It would also be in the description. Just insert whatever spell you want, and if you have a spell you want mouse over for another class, like a heal or dispel, or you need a mouse over to a friendly target, you must change this from harm to no harm. A very important macro for every Demonology Warlock is this one. Right now, if you press your meta keybind and then you press it again, it'll cancel your meta. This is the most annoying thing in the world, so use this macro and you'll never accidentally cancel it. Trust me, you will accidentally do it. I mentioned it earlier, but macro your demonic empowerment and shadow cleave to whatever abilities you want. I personally bake them into my Shadowbolt and my Seed Corruption keybind. Of course, you need your cooldown macro. So your trinket, potion, blood fury if you're an orc, flame caps, and whatever else you got. You can even go so far as to combine the last two macros or all of these macros together and make one fat ass big cooldown macro with your meta and your demonic empowerment, your shadow cleave. I just personally don't want that because I like a little more control on what I'm pressing. It's a little bit, all this other shit with these long ass macros is too much sometimes, you know. Motherfuckers be too lazy. Just give me a couple macros, you know. Which leads me to the next tip. Stock up on flame caps while you can. You should already be stocking up on them, man. You'll be using these the whole expansion for your execute range and just while blasting all the time. Lastly is this week aura. It'll keep a track of everything for you. Okay, there's a couple of them out here. This is just one that I suggest using that I will be using. It'll be in the description below. Show some love to the guy who made it. All right. Well, this was supposed to be a short guide on dungeoning as a demo lock, but it ended up way longer than I thought. My bad. Either way, I hope it helped. I'll be doing Destro Dungeon Guide next and then the Affliction one. I'm streaming 6 days a week from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. All 100% of it on the Wrath of the Lich King beta. I've got a Warlock and my Shadow Priest both level 80 and I'm doing heroics on them daily. Feel free to stop by and ask whatever questions you want at any time or just to come meet some new friends. Much love and I'll see you guys in the next one.